the latest episode of Rounds Rant, and my guest today is Dave Dillon. Dave is currently head coach of Japanese side Kobelco Steelers, a side with players such as Adam Ashley Cooper and Dan Carter on their roster. Dave also spent time with the Chiefs while also coaching for a period in Ireland. So Dave, thanks a million for coming on the show today, and how are things with you today?
Yeah, not too bad. So, thanks for the introduction there.
No worries.
No, we're good. So, just like you said, just at Kobelco Steelers here, half an hour south of Osaka, down the bottom of the main island of Japan. Obviously via New Zealand and Ireland and back to New Zealand and then Japan. So that's the landscape of rugby, I guess. So, it's a good part of the world and, enjoying living here.
So tell me a bit about when you grew up, your childhood. So you were born in New Zealand, so I'm curious to know, what was it like growing up in that spot?
Yeah, so I grew up in a little farming community, about an hour and a half on a good day, southeast of Auckland, so on the North Island there. So come off a dairy farm, so cows, and then moved into town, as I said, town was 500 people, so we had a couple of shops and a couple of schools and that, and a petrol station. But yeah, good childhood. My father was a farmer, then a butcher. So plenty of it revolved around the land, just a good country lifestyle, actually, to be fair. So, and obviously New Zealand with sport and rugby being the number one sport, just, early memories of playing footy in bare feet on a frosty morning and then looking forward to a pie and a fizzy afterwards.
And you touched on it there. How big was rugby during that period? Because obviously now New Zealand, the All Blacks, it's a global thing, especially in the world of professionalism of rugby. But I'm just wondering, back 20, 30 years ago, how important or big was the sport before it went professional?
Good question. So my early memories, my grandfather and father were life members of our local club. So I was born and raised in Ngatea. So back then, the senior club side had a first division, so a premier side, a second division, so first, seconds and thirds, and a 21s team. So there's lots of people playing rugby at grassroots level, as we call it in New Zealand. In more recent times, it's been dramatic changes, I guess, with the way society is, pressures on families and different, I guess, focuses of young men these days. And so that club side that I grew up with has only got the one team now, and that's quite consistent across a lot of the provinces. Obviously, it's only a little province, but the numbers have decreased considerably.
And I'm just curious to know, what got you? Did you start off as a player at a young age? Did you go straight into coaching? How did the game of rugby become part of your life?
I guess learned behaviour. As I just mentioned before, grandfather and father are both life members of the local rugby club, and as you alluded to, back in those times, it was every young man played it, and it was just, I guess, part of life and part of my life growing up, having seen my father play and coach, and then I guess just following and developing a passion through being around him and it being around the family and the community. And obviously, as you alluded to, it is still New Zealand's number one sport. So I'm not saying there's not young people with that dream. I'm just saying when it gets to the club level now, the numbers have definitely decreased.
And how far did you go as a player? Because obviously now you're coaching, but did you get to a high enough level? Did you just play with your local club? How far up the ladder did you get as a player?
So I played provincial age group and then provincial rugby, so the Mitre 10 Cup that's on at the moment, and was in and around super sides, and then like pre-season squads and whatnot, and then you get to an age where you make a decision whether you stay in New Zealand or you use the foundation that you've got and get overseas, and that's how I ended up over in Ireland, I guess.
And what led you? What was the decision that made you head over to Ireland? Because you spent several years coaching there, and you even coached at St. Michael's, the school I went to, and that has produced so many players currently. How important was that period for you, heading over to Ireland and experiencing new ways of playing, new ways of coaching, and even, as you probably admit yourself, a new way of life?
Oh, it was huge for me. So I'd done a degree at university while I was playing for Bay of Plenty and then Waikato over those years. So I had a university degree before I went away, which basically was a good foundation and was probably the catalyst to get me into St. Michael's. I'll come back to that in a minute. But I guess a good friend of mine, Ben Willis, who played for Leinster and played for Island A, and went on to play for Harlequins and that. We'd played the club together and at Waikato together, and he was basically the one who, I guess, created the opportunity for me to go to Blackrock College Rugby Club, which was a great club and a lot of good people there. And then from there, the great Noel Turley, I've heard Greg McWilliams talk about before on his podcast that he did a while back. I didn't know Noel very very long, obviously, but at the time that I was able to know Noel and his wife Catherine, pretty fortunate. He's everything Greg had alluded to. He's just a good man, and he was a connection in with Michaels.
And in relation to Michaels, what did you learn there? Because obviously now it's a big name in the European stakes because it's produced so many of the Leinster and even the Irish players at the minute. And I'm just wondering, what were your experience there? What was the differences between maybe what you learned from in school in New Zealand to what you got to witness as a coach in Ireland?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just a good school. There's a lot of people there that were very good to me and my family. Tim Kelleher, Gary Coakley, and the list goes on. I think for any school, and subsequently when I got home from Ireland, I actually went into school teaching in a pretty similar school in Auckland called Sacred Heart College. And looking back at Michael's, I think good leadership's really important. And I think in that school, the people that have been in those positions, I alluded to Greg, Gary Coakley, Gavin Naggs. I'm getting a bit old, I forget names, but there's a lot of good people there, and right people in the right places, all working towards an outcome. And I guess that was what I learned at Michael's. It was in its infant stages. I was there when the academies were starting to be put in. Was lucky to be part of that. And I think the other thing too is the amount of old boys that are willing to give back, like Andy Skeen. No, he's done very well with his coaching, Sean Skeen, and then I heard Peter Burke talking really fondly around his time at Michael's when he left and was unsure what he's going to do and how he went back and coached. And I guess just the environment, right people in the right places, and everyone working towards the greater good, I guess.
No, that's well said. And you mentioned there you went back to New Zealand and you were a teacher and you also coached. And I'm just curious, and I had this discussion with Greg when he was on. I'm just wondering, why do you think teaching goes hand in hand with coaching, as several high-profile international coaches all taught in a school at some stage? And do you think there's certain abilities you gain from having to control a classroom or even control a PE class that can cross over into rugby coaching?
Yeah, I think it's it's pretty obvious in terms of when you look around the world with the quality of coaches that are in the positions that they are, and a lot of them are teaching backgrounds. I think teaching is all about relationships, finding out how people learn, and getting it in. I think that's really important. I've learned that through teaching. Obviously, planning's a pretty integral part of teaching as well. And effectively, you at any given time you've got 5 or 6 classes that you look after, and you see them a couple of times a week, and there's 30, sometimes 35 students in those classes. So it's trying to form those relationships, work out how different ways you can get your knowledge across, and basically get an outcome, I guess. And when you look at a team and the demands and that of a team and what you're trying to do and your coaching, coaching is teaching to me.
And on that point, you're talking about different environments, and as you said, coaching is essentially teaching. I'm curious to know, you're obviously working now in Japan, and you've spent time in New Zealand, also spent time in Ireland. And say, for instance, the Japanese, from what I've read and seen in interviews, especially with some of the interviews with Eddie Jones when he spent time there with the national team, he was saying they were nearly too obedient and they were too nice almost. And then I'm sure you had different personalities and different cultures in New Zealand and Ireland. I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the main things you've had to adjust from your own personal coaching methods as you've moved to and from different cultures and different countries?
I think, it's a good question. I think at the end of the day, you're relating to people. So that's the first thing. So whether it be Japan, Ireland, or New Zealand, you're dealing with people, and in what we're talking about, you're dealing with rugby players. But I mean, Eddie Jones had valid points there. I mean, a lot of that comes through for the way. The first thing I did before I come over here a couple of years ago was just to look at their education system, look at the mainstream education system, and look at how they learn and what they're exposed to, and then look at the high school and the university rugby as well. So I guess there's a massive culture of respect here. There's so many good things here with the way the culture is. It reminds me of New Zealand when I grew up, 35 years ago as a kid, where kids could be kids, quite a bit of autonomy, and it's just so safe, and people are so respectful over here. Coming to the question in terms of and around their learning and that, I guess it's just trying to get them to think about the game a little bit more rather than be told. I think that's the challenge over here, and I think that does come from the education system. Heavily driven process, outcome based. So it's been great. It's been exciting. I mean, for me, I know whether I end up, whether it be back in New Zealand or back over Island Way or in around that way, I'm going to be a much better coach for being here.
Okay. So to kind of take a step or two back, after your time spent as a teacher, you went on and did a bit of coaching with Bay of Plenty while you also led. You eventually ended up doing some work with the Chiefs. And I'm just curious to know, what was it like working with a club such as the Chiefs, and what exactly did your job consist of during your time there?
Yeah, so I'm born and bred in the Chiefs region. So as I alluded to at the start, Nadia lies within Thames Valley, which is one of the provinces that makes up the Chiefs. So I was in Auckland and got asked to come down, and it was a new role. It was pretty much created by Chris Tyndall, who had come to the Chiefs from New Zealand. He was doing all the contracting at New Zealand for 10 years and and still is a world leader in that space. And then Andrew Strawbridge, Tom Coventry, and Dave Reddy and Wayne Smith were the coaches, and I had a pretty good handle across pretty much every schoolboy player playing the game to first 15 level in New Zealand. And that was through coaching in Auckland at first 15 level, but also coaching the New Zealand Barbarians, which is New Zealand School's second side. So I went down to the Chiefs, and my role there was I ran all their development. So I ran their A side, which is their second side. I ran their 20s, their 18s, and their 17s. My role was player development, talent ID. So I was pretty much looking at the succession plan from the Chiefs as to, projecting in 3 or 4 years' time where they were going to be deficient, obviously the immediate future as well, like the next year, but more so forward thinking, forward planning. Pretty much looking at, when you're talking about where you are, looking at where Leinster are at now with the players that they've got coming through, and particularly a lot of them from St Michael's, which was great to see the Flaming Sword represented. But I was doing that at the Chiefs, so a lot of the players that are playing there now are guys that I've had quite a bit to do with as I said, back with the teaching, the relationship and knowing their families and knowing their backgrounds. Chiefs are pretty, one of the major things that they recruit on is character and competitiveness. So I never put anyone forward that didn't have that. And, so that was my role. I was lucky enough to be there enough to be involved there 4 years in total. And, you learn through osmosis. It was a new role. So that was really exciting. I guess you get to pave your own way. And I just watched them tonight. They beat the Hurricanes tonight, and to see some of those guys perform there, it's quite satisfying to see those guys and know that you've known them for a long time and you've been a small part of where they've got to, you know.
And just on that role there, and you name dropped Leinster there, and they seem to be really setting the standard when it comes to academy rugby and making sure the process from schools to sub-academy into professional rugby, it seems seamless now. And I'm just wondering, when you took over the role, was there any issues, or was there one or two things that you identified that needed improvement? Was it, say, the coaching at schools level? Was it the transition? Was it some of the S&C work, the coaching? Was there any issues or glaring issues that you saw from the move from school to hopefully professional rugby player?
I think the biggest thing is when people they come to an organisation like the Chiefs, because the Chiefs have, and Ian Foster was there, and then Dave Rennie, they have a strong identity with the region, with Māoridom, so with the Māori culture, and it's massive and it plays a really big part there. But more importantly, it's an environment of support. So, when these guys, particularly if they're moving from outside the area down to be potential Chiefs or sign full contracts with the Chiefs, I guess the biggest element, and being a parent myself, is the support. So it's putting support mechanisms in place. I guess at school, when you're at school and you know yourself, you're sort of ride a wave, and you've got your training 3 or 4 times a week, and you've got your schoolwork, and then you return home to mum and dad or whatever your home situation is, and your meals there, and it's quite a safe, comfortable environment. So that transition from first 15 moving through to provincial and professional player, particularly for the boys that are moving, for me, a big part of my role, and something that I like to think from a teaching background and how I was raised, is that holistic support. So, if you sit in front of someone and you say to the parents, "We will look after him," to me, that's your word, and you've got to deliver. And that's something, the Chiefs have got a lady called Lynn that's there, Lynn Sanson, who runs a house, and the boys live with her. And then there's another few families that take people in, and just good people wherever you look. And that's really important when you're recruiting players, that you're supporting them in. It's not when, it's if. It's not if, it's when, in terms of, they've got to have issues, and there's got to be little things that pipe up in that, but it's making sure that they got the support to get through that, and they feel like they belong, I guess, and then you get the best out of them, and you involve the family in terms of watching games and coming down and meeting other families, and it basically does become the Chiefs mana or Chiefs culture. So I really enjoyed that, and that's not a challenge, but I guess that's what needs to be done to be successful in that space.
And would that be quite similar to the other places, the other clubs and provinces across New Zealand, as in everyone always has their ideas? Well, I'm speaking of Irish people, English people, people from European rugby nations, and they always wonder what is the common characteristic in New Zealand that makes them so good. Because if you look over the last 20 years, they've been the dominant force and they've set standards on and off the pitch. And I'm just wondering, having been born there, having lived there for so long and worked with different clubs and different provinces and worked with so many different players and coaches, is there a certain characteristic you think New Zealand have that certainly helps them on the rugby pitch, or is it very much it's different wherever you go?
I think first things first, it's our number one sport, so that's a pretty big thing in terms of young players coming through in New Zealand. I think first 15 rugby's massive now. It's televised. There's a game or 2 games a week. I think the New Zealand kids play a lot of sport, a lot of different sports. So, in my role with player development talent, I need to sit down with someone and hear that they're from a basketball, hockey, rugby background, or they played football till they were 13 plus did swimming, and that's really exciting. And then the other, I guess, element that you chuck into it is, coaching's probably the biggest thing in player development. So the programs that are run for first 15 coaches in their provinces and through New Zealand Rugby Union and the franchises in New Zealand Rugby Union they get up towards that player engagement, towards game-related activities, the importance of relationships, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a combination probably of those 2 or 3 things in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I suppose one thing that's probably overlooked, and especially maybe in European countries, the big nations, is the fact it is the number one sport. Because obviously, I'm sure with Ireland, you've got the Gaelic games, and you've got certain counties do not even know what a rugby ball looks like. They're so deeply into their Gaelic football or their hurling. And then I suppose with England, they're mad into so many different sports. So that is probably something that probably is overlooked, probably from a player point of view, but then also a media point of view. So it is interesting that you bring it up, that everything is geared towards being a rugby player from a sporting perspective in New Zealand. So to push on from your Chiefs experience, you end up, and it was only a few years ago, you end up moving to Japan to coach. And I'm just curious to know what happened there. How did that move come about? Did somebody simply give you a call? Was it someone within the Chiefs? How did the move come about?
I was fortunate enough for a guy, a good coach called Peter Russell. So Peter Russell was instrumental in turning Hawke's Bay around with Tom Coventry back in the early 2000s. And then he was involved in the Highlanders for a couple of years, and then ended up in Europe at Newcastle, where Newcastle were pretty successful as well. So I'd done my IRB. I talked before about coaching certificates. So I'd done my IRB level 4 through New Zealand, and Pete was on that, as were a lot of other coaches that are pretty prominent in world rugby today. And so he got the opportunity to go across there, and I guess to get better at something. I mean, I really enjoyed my role at the Chiefs, and I was passionate about that, and I loved having represented Bay of Plenty, being back there coaching at Mitre 10 and Cup. But I sort of saw it as an experience for myself to do something full-time, get out of my comfort zone, experience a different culture, but also from a family point of view, to give my wife and my children just, a different experience. And speaking to other people that have played over here and a couple of other people that have coached, and what I alluded to before around how the culture and society is here, and just decided that would be beneficial to me, and also hugely beneficial to my family.
And you spoke about it there, different experience, different culture, and rugby aside, what was the biggest culture change or culture shock that you encountered when you moved from New Zealand to Japan?
I think, probably the biggest shock for me is you've probably heard the New Zealand attitude of she'll be right and no worries and sort of can do, was just getting settled, I guess. I was over initially by myself, and there's a lot of paperwork over here to get a lot of things that are quite simple back home and quite untime consuming. It's sort of probably the direct opposite here, so everything's got to be correct and filled in the right area and outcome focus, as I talked about before when you're alluding to some of the questions there around the schooling and that here. So that was probably the biggest culture shock for me, was just how long things that I took for granted back home that were quite a process here. And probably the second thing was the second thing that hit me was just how respectful people were to each other and how the society ran, and particularly for the elderly. Not going into too much, but I got crooked my first couple of weeks here, and the medical care over here and the insurance that's provided for everyone that lives here is just next level, like unbelievable. So yeah, it was nothing really to do with the boys. The boys are awesome, and where I was at EDC, really passionate company with a strong history. So it was just more society, everyday society stuff that sort of I needed to adapt to, and that's probably the biggest thing. Like I'm the foreigner in Japan. I'm not at home. I'm a visitor, and that sort of mindset I've taken in around the culture, the food, and the language.
And quickly on it, have you become accustomed to the food? Because I know one or two of my friends went there and struggled initially. Have you come to terms with what's being served to you on a plate every day?
Look, for the first year I ate in the dorm, and I guess to fit in anywhere, you don't want to look different, do you? Yeah. And you don't want to be different. You're Gaijin because you're foreign, which is the term for being foreign here. But my family come over in school holidays for the first sort of 8 months, so it's quite a bit of downtime by myself. And I actually ate at the dorm with the players, so I come off a farm back home, so I'm used to being told from my late father, you eat everything on your plate and you eat that even if you don't like it. So that sort of always stuck with me in the back of my mind. So there's a lot of times where I was eating food that I didn't even know what it was. But, you know, I had a lot of eyes watching me, and I'm a good doer. I mean, I'm one of the players that's managed to maintain my weight, but everything's gone from north to south. You see a lot of other players that get quite skinny, but I've stayed strong and stayed the same weight, but it's just gone south. But I enjoy the food, mate. It's very healthy, and I mean, you only need to Google the average life expectancy of Japanese men and women, and you'll see that there's not a lot of fried food. You can find that if you want to look for it, but the Japanese diet is heavily plant-based and meat, you know, and unprocessed.
Unlike most of the stuff I'm eating, so I'll take note of that. So several months ago, it was announced, obviously, that you were the new head coach of the Kobelco Steelers, and that you'd be working alongside Wayne Smith while also coaching the likes of Adam Ashley Cooper and even Dan Carter as well. I'm just curious to know, and a lot of people in Ireland don't really have a clear idea as to what exactly Japanese club rugby is really like. So I'm wondering what sort of insights can you give to us, because we're seeing it every single month when there's transfers open in Europe or when players are looking to get away, and we're seeing a hell of a lot of high-profile players move to Japan at some stage during their career, I should say.
Well, I guess first things first, all the rugby over here, so they've got 2 or 3 divisions, but all those divisions are company run. So, for example, I alluded I alluded to before that I was at NEC, which is a technology company. So they're based an hour north of Tokyo.
Okay.
And then now I've taken the head coach role down about half an hour from Osaka, living on a man-made island called Rokko Island. And the company that I'm with is Kobelco Steelers, which you alluded to, which is a steel company. And, we've done a lot of work around it, but Kobelco Steelers is the biggest producer of aluminium foils for cars in the world. So I think 70%. So all the rugby is company based. So Ricoh, Toshiba, which are obviously technology companies, Suntory, which is a massive beverage company and supplement company here. And then, you just got all different Kintitsu, which is half an hour up the road, as a railway hotel company. So all the rugby is based around the companies, and the companies had teams, and a lot of the companies have, like NEC had a women's volleyball team, and Toyota's got a men's basketball team, and so they run a couple of professional teams. Majority of companies, rugby and as I alluded to, other sports.
Wow. And what sort of standard would the Japanese league be? I know it's probably very tough to compare it, to put it next to a Premiership or a Pro 14, unless you're playing against the actual teams. But how high is the level? As I'm just curious, like when a Adam Ashley Cooper or Dan Carter flies over, are they expecting a backseat ride, or do they get there and they're like, Jesus, this is quite a high standard. I need to pull my socks up here and start training hard.
Yeah, well, it's I guess, until you play against people. We just come back from the Mauritius Tens where we finished third, and obviously it's a different format of the game, but they had Montpellier, Newcastle, Western Force, those teams there. So we were fortunate enough to finish third there. But the thing with Japanese rugby, and you would have seen with the Summers, it is very, very quick. So it's high tempo rugby. Those foreign players that come in, I know with the two players that you talked about, they're very good rugby players, obviously outstanding world class rugby players, but more importantly, they're good men. So we've got Andy Ellis here as well, who's obviously ex-All Black and Crusader as well. But I think those guys come over, I think, for a couple of reasons. I think obviously it's a lifestyle choice. In Europe and even New Zealand, you play lots of games of rugby. If you're at All Black and Super level, you can knock off sort of 20 to 30 games, and if you're in Premiership, well, the numbers in around that. And over here, for example, this season's a little bit unique, but most seasons you're sort of looking at the last 2 years when I was at NEC, sort of 13 games. It's really interesting. Like the pre-season's long, so we assembled in April, and our first competition game is in September. So it's unlike Super and unlike the Premiership. But it'd be up and around a lot quicker than Premiership rugby, and probably be between Mitre 10 Cup and Super level.
And would you... I remember Eddie Jones, and I don't want to keep name dropping as if I'm his number one fan, but he was saying with the Japanese, they weren't physically able to compete against the top tier one side. So it was all about, as you were saying, it was all about quick ball, it was all about skill sets, it was all about fitness. So is that what you're focusing on with your club, or have you brought some of the structures and attacking structures? And even, as I mentioned, Wayne Smith, I'm sure he's got a vast array of experience and ideas with them. So did you have to adjust to Japanese rugby, or did you bring your own take on rugby and kind of force it upon the Japanese players?
Good question. I think any team that you're in, you've got to look at the profile and what you're working with. I guess we're quite fortunate. We've got some very good Japanese players. And previously at this, Jim McKay was here for 2 years, and he was able to win a Super Rugby title with Queensland and assist with Australia as well as attack coach. And Kobe were very, very good underneath him. They played a very expansive attacking style. previous to that, Gary Gold was here, and so was Alistair Cortez, that was South African coach as well. So the boys are used to playing a wide, expansive rugby. I guess the challenge with any coach is, so they're at a good skill level, but is to just continually work on that catch pass, that spatial awareness and decision making. And I guess what we've done is, instead of putting people on the line and running them, and we still do fitness testing, and obviously we've got a very good S&C, Basil Curtis, who was with South Africa and the Bulls when they were very successful under Heinrich Meyer. We've had a lot of rugby-based conditioning in the preseason, so a lot of conditioning games of the ball, a lot of decision-making, a lot of breaking down of the skills and everything like that. And, we want to play a wide, expansive style, but we're fortunate enough to have those quality coaches that have been here prior to us turning up,
To summarise going into next year's World Cup, and that's going to be a massive event from a global perspective, but then also from a Japanese perspective, because they really put themselves on the map in the last World Cup out and with that famous victory over the South Africans. And what should we expect from Japanese rugby heading into the World Cup? But then on top of that, what should fans who travel over to Japan expect when they visit Japan for the World Cup?
So a couple of questions here. So first one I'd say is there's a lot of quality foreign coaches that are coaching at the companies. So there's some very good development going on. There's some good players coming through from the Japanese university system. And then when you go above that, you've got Jamie Joseph, who's obviously been over here as a player and actually was one of the players that was, back in the day, was able to play for the All Blacks in Japan. He's basically overseeing Japanese rugby at the moment, in charge of the national team and the Sunwolves, and then assisting him is Tony Brown, who once again had massive experience over here as a player and was with Jamie at the Highlanders, and then Scott Hansen's involved there as well, running their defence, and he's actually on our Kobe staff as well, with a wealth of experience with Canterbury back home and in Europe as well. So I guess I alluded to before, you've got quality people in the right places. And just recently, I guess, example, how they've run that Sunwolves program, they've improved. The performance was a lot better from the previous couple of years. They're developing a whole heap of players, a lot of youth coming through. They ran a Japan A team this year that went out and played 3 of the New Zealand's franchises A sides when the Sunwolves were touring New Zealand. So they've done some really good work around building depth in key positions. They've got a number of Gaijin foreign players that will be Japanese qualified come November or moving through to the World Cup. So I think what you can expect from Japan is more of the same, if not, another level. Yeah.
And then, go on.
So that's the rugby. That's where I see the rugby. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be here 2 seasons and seen some changes in that and around, and see the development. And there's a lot of good stuff going on, particularly with the national side and at the Sunwolves, which is filtering down to good people at the companies.
And then to follow on with the second part of that statement, which was the question, what should the fans be expecting when they visit Japan?
I think they'll be a bit like I was and many people are when they come here. They'll enjoy the country, they'll enjoy the people, they'll enjoy not having to look over their shoulder every 5 minutes to see if someone's taken anything or anything like that. It's easy to get around. The transport system's outstanding. So I had to go for a referees meeting in Tokyo last Sunday, and I caught a train from where I live, 5 minutes from where I live, into the main station, and which is a Shinkansen, which is a bullet train, and you travel 250 to 300 k's an hour, and it's just efficient. It's a very efficient society, and everything that's done. So I think people that are thinking about it or people that are coming and have a wonderful time. And obviously there's a lot of strong history here as well as an island, but different history and different features. And I think it'll be awesome. I think the World Cup will be awesome.
No, I'm looking forward to it as well, both to see what happens on and off the pitch. And I suppose that pretty much wraps up the main questions. And we have to, unfortunately for yourself, move on to the quick fire round. And yeah, I encourage you to say whatever you first think of. And
that's because you just railroad the whole thing, couldn't it?
Good. So I'll start off with first question, and that is, what is the strangest thing you've seen on a rugby pitch?
One of my mates got rucked at first 15 level, and he pulled his shorts to the side, and I saw his testicle hanging out.
Oh, that's a pretty good one.
I didn't realise our testicles were blue, so there you go. That was interesting. And another my mate was watching in dry retching, so yeah, that's the strangest thing I've seen.
If you were to give a TED talk, what would you talk about?
If I was to give a TED talk, I would talk about the importance of relationships in society.
Good answer. What is the worst advice you see or hear being given in your world?
He's got potential.
Who is the best player you've coached?
Jordan Taufua plays for the Crusaders and hopefully be an All Black soon.
Which person do you admire most and why?
Well, my father passed away in September, so up till then it was my father. And I obviously still admire him. Why I admired my dad was because he gave everything so that we could have a lot, I guess. That's what he did, how he did it, and how he was as a person. So that would be my answer to that.
And second last one, what is your favourite film?
Favourite film is Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, it was actually on last night. I watched it again. It's a cracker.
Andy Buffane crawled 400 yards on his hands and knees through piss and shit to freedom.
Yeah, we'll take that as a story any day of the week. So last question is, describe yourself in 3 words.
I've never been asked that question, actually. I guess I like to think of myself caring, respectful, and work ethic, maybe.
Okay. Maybe?
I probably should have said work ethic first. Probably rolled off the tongue a bit better, but yeah.
Okay. Well, no, that concludes the podcast, Dave. So thanks a lot for coming on. I'm glad we finally got the time zones and whatnot working. So it is sometimes tough to get these things sorted, but I thank you for coming on. Listen, I really enjoy getting to learn about the ins and outs of Japanese rugby, New Zealand rugby, and the many different places you've been. And listen, I wish you all the best with the season and challenges ahead, and also off the field. I hope you have a great few weeks and a great year.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I guess I've been fortunate enough to listen to a few of these podcasts, and I guess blessed enough to know some of the people and work with them at St. Michael's. And I guess anyone that's out there listening to it that's an old boy or involved in St. Michael's, it's, just in conclusion, it was a pretty massive part of me teaching back home and myself being where I am today. I up the flaming sword. I love the place. It's a lot of bloody good men and good people, and I just feel fortunate that I was lucky enough to be there at the time that I was.
Yeah, no, hear to that. And a lot of people listening to it that will be students, and I think it is important to know that you did play your part. Obviously now it's much more global and the media pays more attraction to it, but you were at the early stages, as you even previously mentioned, with the likes of Gary Coakley, Greg McWilliam, so you definitely did play your part in what it is today. So no doubt, hats off to you.
Yeah, no, I look forward to having a beer or 3 at the Mirren.
No, it's still going strong, so yeah, we should look forward to that. Okay, well listen, Dave, thanks a lot.
No worries, take care.